There's a very interesting article in the Financial Times today about the difference between the perception and the reality when it comes to immigration. The difference between the vocal public opinion and what is demonstrated, what is true, what is statistically proven and recorded. And recent events, including the wave of far-right violence, have brought immigration back into the spotlight, intensifying this debate, and therefore further blurring the line between the perception and the reality. And it's sometimes important to take stock and to say, these are the statistics, and this is all the noise. And you can either watch GB News or you can look at the research. And I know which I prefer. And immigration has been a contentious topic for a long time in the UK, with public concern peaking during significant events like Brexit and like the European migration crisis in 2015. But simply because the public are talking about something doesn't mean that it's necessarily important. It simply means that the pot has been stirred, doesn't it? According to recent polling data, concerns about immigration among UK voters have now reached levels that were last seen in 2016, following the European migration crisis preceding Brexit. But even if that's the case, these concerns are not universally distributed across the political spectrum. Conservative voters, influenced by the government's focus on issues like small boat crossings, have significantly peaked in comparison to Labour voters. Conservative voters are significantly more concerned about this than Labour voters. That's interesting, because during the Brexit referendum and the European migration crisis, it was a fairly universal concern. So despite these heightened concerns, it's crucial to acknowledge that the UK remains, and this is extraordinary, the UK remains one of the most accepting countries towards immigration. According to the 2022 World Values Survey, 55% of Britons believe that immigration has a positive impact on our country, a figure more than double that of France or Germany. And this statistic highlights a critical discrepancy between the political rhetoric surrounding immigration and the underlying attitudes of real British people. A key point of recent political debate has been the rise in the small boats crossings by migrants. However you think that has grown, I personally think it's a result of Lord Frost failing to find an alternative to the Dublin Protocol. I think it's a result of stupidity by the last government, and by extension, the stupidity of the Home Office and of Theresa May's hostile environment. I think the small boats crossings is about the danger to these people who have no other safe and legal routes to use to get to our country. You've got to see this in the light of the 3 laws by Suella Braverman: the Nationality and Borders Act, the Illegal Immigration Act, and then slightly after Suella Braverman's time in the Home Office, the Rwanda Act. All of these together were there to bolster and to shore up a policy of outsourcing our immigration, our asylum responsibility, our refugee responsibility that we undertook according to the 1951 Refugee Convention, which has to be understood before somebody drops a comment here quoting it about applying for refuge in the first safe country. It has to be understood within the context of the case history that accompanies the what is it, 70 odd years that it's been in existence. And that case history is heavily influenced by British judgments, by British courts, that allows 70 days for transit from the point of origin to the point where a migrant requests refugee consideration, refugee status. Our courts, not international courts, not lefty lawyers and all that sort of rubbish put out by the Conservative Home Office under Suella Braverman, under Priti Patel, under James Cleverly, under Theresa May. And in 2022, 45,755 people arrived in small boats to the UK. But this number represents only a tiny fraction of the overall immigration to the UK, which actually saw 1.3 million people enter via organised visa routes in 2022. Furthermore, asylum seekers, often the focal point of public concern, accounted for just 1 in 12 immigrants in Britain from outside the EU last year. So the asylum problem and the small boats problem is a small issue in comparison to what Rishi Sunak took to calling legal immigration, the difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration. In fact, these are spurious terms that were defined into law, but you can't define something that is nonsense into law. And while we are still signatories to the 1951 Refugee Convention, somebody is not an illegal migrant because they've followed an illegal route to come to this country if they then claim asylum. They are then, under the 1951 Refugee Convention, we should process their claims, and if we then reject their claims, then they become an illegal migrant. Keir Starmer is now in a position where he's got to make a decision. Does he process the claims of all these migrants who were not allowed to claim asylum when they got to our shores under Suella Braverman's bizarre 3 laws? Does Keir Starmer effectively give these people some sort of free pass? Well, what he can do, of course, is give them the opportunity to claim asylum by repealing those 3 laws. Once they have claimed asylum, then they can be processed in the normal way. And should they be proven not to qualify, then they can be removed from our country. But I think we need to... The numbers are so great because of the hostile environment that Theresa May set up, because of the go slow that was encouraged by the Home Office. The numbers are now so huge that we have to find a way to deal with the time frame and the large number of people who are waiting. My instinct is that they can work and contribute tax and demonstrate their commitment to our values. In many other countries, that would happen automatically. But the majority of immigrants in Britain are not asylum seekers, but individuals who've entered the UK through the post-Brexit points-based immigration system, primarily for work or for study. And that has now been reduced significantly by since March by the last government's changes in the visa system. Not necessarily good, but the numbers have come down significantly. And yet it's despite the small numbers of the asylum seekers, the cost of managing the asylum system has nevertheless surged, reaching a record £4 billion in the year to March 2023. This spending represents 0.3% of the UK's total annual government expenditure, but it seems so much more. And we need to get that figure right down. Another area where public perception diverges sharply from reality is the alleged link between immigration and crime. And the recent surge in far-right violence has been partly fueled by claims that increased immigration correlates with the rise in violent crime. However, Data from the Office for National Statistics tells a completely different story. Violent crime rates in England and Wales have actually fallen to a 4-decade low in 2023, with incidents per 1,000 people only 1/5 of what they were when they peaked in 1995. Academic studies, including those by Professor Brian Bell of King's College London, consistently find no significant link at all between higher immigration and increased crime rates. Immigrants commit crimes at the same rates as the native population. There is, however, a slight increase in property crime among asylum seekers, but this is because they are disadvantaged individuals, and it's comparable to the crimes of disadvantaged native populations. People who are poor tend to commit crime. So, one of the most pervasive myths about immigration is that it depresses wages and harms job prospects for native workers. Yet again, research contradicts this narrative. The Office for Budget Responsibility notes that increased net migration leads to a larger economy. As a capitalist society, we need immigration because our birth rates are falling and people are leaving in droves. However, the effect of increased immigration on GDP per capita is small and uncertain, depending on the skill levels of migrants and their employment status. Studies by Oxford University's Migration Observatory and the Nuffield Foundation have shown that while immigration has a marginal impact on wages, it is not the primary driver of wage trends. For example, between 1994 and 2016, immigration reduced the hourly wage of the lowest paid UK workers by just 0.5 pence per year. In contrast, the highest paid workers saw a slight wage increase. The belief that cutting immigration would significantly boost wages lacks substantial evidence. It's a fantasy. Another salient concern is the perceived strain that immigration places on the National Health Service. You hear people saying that immigrants are taking up beds in our hospitals. Polling by Ipsos found that 70% of Britons believe immigration adds pressure to the NHS, with 32% thinking migrants use the NHS more than those born in the UK. However, a 2018 report by the Migration Advisory Committee revealed that migrants contribute significantly more to the NHS than they consume. Not only do they pay taxes and an NHS surcharge, but they are also statistically younger and less likely to use health services. Moreover, immigration is essential for the NHS's functioning. Currently, about 20% of doctors, 33% of nurses in England are foreign-born. Without this workforce, the NHS would struggle to meet the demand for healthcare services. So while public opinion on immigration is often driven by fear and by the encouragement of people like Tate and Farage and Tommy Robinson and others on the far right and GB News and Lee Anderson, well, let's take Lee Anderson out because we don't necessarily want to talk about people who can barely string a sentence together. But the reality is more nuanced and actually flies against the rhetoric. The UK remains a nation that benefits from immigration, both economically and socially, and the challenge lies in bridging the gap between perception and reality, ensuring that public discourse is informed by facts rather than by fear. I've tried to give as balanced a view as possible. I'm heavily reliant on what was written in the FT article. It is a brilliant article, and I highly recommend it, with lots more graphs than frankly I think I'm capable of understanding. But Peter Foster and Amy Borrett have done a spectacular job. I said this article was written today. It wasn't. It was written on the 9th of August. It's just something I've seen today. But it's the concern about legal and irregular migration that you hear on channels like GB News, that you hear from people like Farage, that you hear from people protesting in the street, it's simply not borne out by the academic analysis and the effect, for example, of immigration on wages, crime, public services. There is a huge gap between perception and reality. Public concern might exist, but opinion is heavily influenced by a very vocal minority. And it's wrong.